Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. It is exactly 10 after 8 o'clock news and views right here on Salam Media, and we are going to be looking at an important issue which probably impacts on most of us as workers or employees. You might even be an employer. So this, I think, is very important to be shared with one and all this morning. Our guest is Michael Bagraim. I hope I'm saying that correctly. He is the DA MP and also a labour law expert. A very good morning to you, Michael. Welcome to the program.
Hi, thank you very much. I really appreciate you wanting to speak to me on air. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much.
I promise you the pleasure is ours. We appreciate you being available to talk to us about this very important matter. But before I proceed, Michael, am I saying your name correctly, Bagraim?
You are, it's Bagraim, yes, as in handbag with raim.
Oh, okay. Lovely to have you on the show. So let's start off. We understand that Cyril Ramaphosa has signed into law the Employment Equity Amendment Act 4, Amendment Act number 4 of 2022. The Act amends the Employment Equity Act of 1998, which is Act 55 of 1998. And I'm not going to be really worried too much about the dates and the act numbers. Let's try and get to the heart of the matter and understand how it impacts on you and I and all other workers and obviously employers as well. I understand that the new measures is to promote diversity and equality in the workplace. And the effective date, obviously back then, was still to be proclaimed by the president. So where do we stand on this matter? My understanding was that this was all done and dusted. And, diversity and equality in the workplace has already been implemented and we're good to go. Why are we talking about this yet again in the middle of the year, in the year 2023?
Okay, thank you very much for that. This does go back many years. It goes back almost 25 years, where the legislation was brought into being. It is a form of social engineering. In other words, it's trying to make the workplace reflective of the demographics of South Africa. The problem that you've got is that over these past 25 years, it hasn't been effective at all. And in fact, what has happened is one of the outcomes has been enormous unemployment. We're now almost 40% unemployment in South Africa.
Sure.
It's been a destruction of our productivity, in that we're the second worst productivity in the world. Now,
Sure.
South Africans are productive people. We are innovative people. We are a people that are fast forward, looking into the future. And so there's something wrong with social engineering. I mean, you can think about it where the Nationalist Party, their cornerstone of their policy was social engineering, obviously in favor of whites and to downgrade or downtread and to subjugate the people of South Africa. So that's what the National Party did under apartheid. They brought in social engineering as a way of creating equality for themselves, for Afrikaners, for white people. That obviously was pernicious. It was obviously destructive. It almost destroyed South Africa completely. And we were very, very lucky. And I think at the behest of the trade union movement, I think they were the most effective grouping in South Africa to bring down the might of the Nationalist Party and to bring in an era of equality, an era of democracy, and an era under a constitutional government. We had the most fantastic constitution in the world. So what is wrong? And the unfortunate situation is that the ANC, in wanting to bring about that equality, did exactly what the National Party did, in that they looked at social engineering. And they then implemented the employment equity legislation, BEE, And we all know what's happened. Yes, there
Mhm.
are some people that benefited, a very few, a top level of politicians and business people, they've benefited enormously, masses of wealth, but it hasn't spread to the people at all. And of course, in answer to the failure of social engineering, what does the ANC do? They just tighten the screws. It's a common practice around the world. When you're in a hole,
Mhm.
just keep digging, which is a bit silly. One should go back and say, where have we gone wrong? What's the problem? Why are we, when we're talking about youth in South Africa today, we're talking almost 70% unemployment. It's not sustainable. And why are we talking about it right now? Because President Ramaphosa did sign the amendment into power a few months back, but we're talking about it now because the Minister of Employment and Labour, Minister Tulas Nkezi, has now implemented, he's a communist, and he's implemented regulations that are absolutely pernicious. They are unbelievably bad. And so now you find regulations in a whole lot of industries in every single province basically telling you who you can employ and who you can't employ. And who really, and sorry to say this, but who sucks the hind tits is the colored people of South Africa, the Indian people of South Africa, and obviously the white people. So it's colored Indians and white. Worst off are going to be the colored and Indian people in South Africa because they've basically almost been banned from a whole lot of industries. Because if you
So,
look at how
Michael,
you
let
can,
me come in here.
yes,
The problem that I have with this piece of legislation, obviously, is qualifications and skills. So, yes, I do get that the whole social engineering had to be done by the ANC, the ruling party, whom, as you've correctly said, has taken us right back to the days of the Nationalist Party, bringing the country almost to a halt, with mass scale corruption and everything else that goes with it. However, excluding these minority groups from the bigger picture is going to further marginalize or further create problems for the country, because when you look at the masses, they haven't been upskilled and trained sufficiently enough to take on these jobs. Again, a failing by the ruling party, because what they should have done was focus the light on the unemployed and uneducated youth to upskill them so that they are ready to go into the marketplace.
and I absolutely 100% agree with you because it's no good putting someone into a job where you've put them up for failure. But this act, this Employment Equity Act and its regulations have now not even taken that into account. All they're now doing is quotas. They're putting quotas into place. So if you've got, for instance, 100 people in your workplace and you're allowed 1% coloreds and you've got 2%, what do you do? First of all, you can't ever employ another colored person. That's the first thing. The second thing
Mm,
is you need to aim to push the colored people out so that we can match the quota that is allowed. I mean, that reminds you of the Nazis, where you've got
absolutely.
those quotas that have come in. It's absolutely ridiculous. And I'm hoping the Constitutional Court has a look at this and says, but that is ridiculous. Obviously, what one wants to do is and every business should be looking at that, and I think they are because I deal with businesses every day. They're looking at reflecting the demographics of South Africa. But it doesn't help to reflect
Mm,
the demographics of the whole of South Africa if you're sitting in a business in a village in KwaZulu Natal. Obviously, you wouldn't be able to reflect the demographics of South Africa. You would have more Indian people in your
mm.
business than you would have, for instance, black people. But that's not allowed in terms of these quotas now, and that doesn't make any sense at all.
Uh,
You could, for instance, make some positive input to say, yes, let's train more black, Indian, and colored people so that they are fit for purpose and would then run our economy because that's the future. The future of South Africa is that we do need to reflect those demographics, but we need to uplift people first.
Absolutely, absolutely. No one's arguing that point at all. But then this, when you talk about the Employment Equity Act, they kind of speaking with forked tongues because they go on to say that the EEA prohibits discrimination against an employee directly or indirectly in any employment policy or practice on the grounds of, for example, exactly what we're talking about: race, gender, pregnancy, age, color, family responsibility, and a whole list of things. That kind of is double speak, is it not? Question number one. Question number two: how will smaller employers be affected by the amendments? And we know that government has been pushing this whole thing about, the smaller employers, and talking about entrepreneurship, and pushing all of that, hoping that that will make the economy turn or rev up the economy. But this is going to put a spoke in the wheels of revving up the economy, so to speak.
Well, it does. There is one tiny little glimmer of hope in that for the first time ever, the government has recognized businesses under 50 employees, and they're saying that you can have, if you've got under 50 employees, you can have an exemption from the employment equity legislation. So there is a glimmer of hope in this legislation. Let's give due when it is due, and let's praise that particular clause in the legislation, which is good. But of course, what is it doing? It's saying to small business, don't grow to 51 people. Keep your staffing under 50 people. Rather mechanize,
Absolutely.
outsource, bring in goods from elsewhere, and that's what's happening. So I've got clients who are saying, "Well, I've now got 45 people. I was thinking of investing and expanding my business, but I won't do that now. I can't do it because now I have to fall under the 50 threshold." So that backfires as well because
Mm,
I've got a business that I'm speaking to right now, and they said, "Actually, you know what? We're rather going to invest abroad. We don't need that extra trouble in our lives now." I mean, that's silly altogether because we're
mm,
trying to
mm,
create more
mm.
employment in South Africa. It's dangerous. But to answer your question, people who employ under 50 are benefiting from this new legislation. So there is a benefit and there is a recognition that small business needs to be helped out. But then, on the other hand, if small business needs to be helped out by exempting them from the legislation, that's really saying that the legislation itself is a handbrake to job creation. That's what it's
Absolutely.
saying. And if
Hmm.
that's the case, then why punish a business that employs 55 people?
Hmm.
Why put that handbrake on their development? And it doesn't make sense at all. They haven't been able to explain it. Look, it is communist ideology. We must accept that. The minister is a member of the Communist Party, and he wants to put quotas. He wants to have complete control over who you can employ, when you can employ them, and what industry. And that control, unfortunately, doesn't understand business.
Okay, so are there any sectors of the economy that is exempted apart from the under 50 businesses that employ under 50 people? I'm thinking, what happens with the SNDF, SAPs, and employees? And we know that they are state employers. But in terms of those entities, um, are they exempted? Can anybody apply to join the arm, the SNDF, SAPS, etc.? Um, what's the situation
No,
with that
no,
situation?
absolutely not. Absolutely not. They have their own employment equity plans, and those plans have targets. They've got quotas, and if they've got too many colored people, well, then they're just not going to employ any more colored people. And I think that is the case right now, unfortunately. So they haven't exempted themselves. The only exemption you're finding is for the volunteers, for instance, and for people that earn um, only a stipend, not a salary. So there's no real exemption in terms of the employment equity legislation. But even if you're exempting small businesses, you're going to find that small business tries to get a contract with government, they're going to have to actually subject themselves voluntarily to the legislation. So that's going to backfire on them anyway, because you're going to, government being the biggest employment entity in the country, it creates a problem. So you can't then do business with government. Well, the government doesn't pay that easily, so it might be a blessing in disguise. But
Okay, so Michael,
yeah.
how do we move forward? I presume this is effective is effective immediately. How do small employers move forward? And what about the larger employers? What are they going to do? How do they get themselves out of a very sticky situation?
Okay, it's not effective immediately at all. In fact, we've got further 25 days to comment on this.
Okay.
The Department of Employment and Labour are taking commentary on the regulations. They're looking for input. And then over and above that, the Democratic Alliance is going to go to the Constitutional Court to challenge this whole exercise of social engineering. It doesn't fit in with President Mandela's dream. And we all remember President Mandela's dream. It was the awakening of South Africa, where we were going to have a freedom for all in the country. There was going to be no discrimination at all. That was the promise that came from President Mandela, and I, for one, was very excited about that. In that everyone is going to be equal, and there's going to be no social engineering of any nature. And unfortunately, that dream has faded very quickly to what we're now experiencing: mass unemployment, unproductive people, and people in the streets literally begging. Can you imagine what President Mandela would say today if he saw that?
Absolutely. Michael, that's where we'll leave it. Thank you indeed for your input on this matter, and we'll wait and see what transpires. Are you hopeful that common sense will prevail, though?
I have to be. I live here, and I believe South Africans are good people. And I don't think the people, it's not just up to the politicians. I don't think the people are going to accept a discrimination of this nature.
Okay, we will be talking with you sometime in the future to get an update on this matter. Thank you indeed for your time, Michael Bagraim, DAMP and Labour Law expert. That brings us to 28 after 8 exactly on News and Views right here on Salam Media.
The kitchen.